Good morning, ladies and gentlemen from all around the world. It's a pleasure to be with you today. My name is Thomas Emanuel. I'm a director at STR, which is a co-star company, the data partners of this event. And I'm delighted to be here today. I'll be giving you a quick presentation on hotel performance across the world, but then we'll drill down and have a look at the UK and, of course, more importantly, for today's session anyway, the Midlands as well, before we go on, and I'll be moderating a panel on revitalising the visitor economy. So without further ado, let's move forward and have a look at performance on a global level, first of all. Now, this is hotel occupancy data. And what we're looking at is China, Europe, the US, and the UK, and it is occupancy on a rolling 7-day basis from the beginning of the year. And as we can see, China, it fell early, as of course that's where the pandemic started, before recovering fairly well. And actually, China's not far behind where they were last year. When you compare that to the other regions, the US has really been stagnating now for about 4 months between 40 and 50% occupancy, so well below where you'd expect it. And then Europe and the UK, fairly similar patterns, peaking in the summer and tailing off recently, which will be a recurring theme as we go through this presentation. But it's not just those markets, of course, that are challenged. And there we go. The slide has now changed. Apologies. So this slide shows every sub-market around the world that STR track, and the color of each dot, which represents a sub-market, correlates to the occupancy level. So you can see, yes, there are some bright spots across Asia Pacific, Australia, New Zealand, but well over half of all markets around the world still trading well under 50% as of last week. So a truly, truly global pandemic. My apologies, the slide is not moving forward. Could I have some tech help, please? There we go. Thank you. So what does a hotel need to get some of that occupancy back? And I think this is actually, for me, a really important slide. And I'll just go through it. If we start at the bottom, we can see, and we saw over summer, we just need hotels open and effectively not to be under lockdown for domestic leisure business to return. If we want short haul international leisure to return, we need borders open, we need quarantines lifted, of course. And then for domestic business, we need businesses to start getting back to usual. I'm at home. I'm sure most of you are at home watching this as well. So once we start to return to the office, we'll start to see domestic business return. And then vaccinations, they're on the horizon, as we all know, and that will enable international longer haul leisure as well as international corporate business to return. And then we do think the last sector, which I know is an important one for the Midlands, group will be the last sector we believe to return. And I think some of that will correlate to economic recovery. If we could please advance the slide. So as I mentioned, the corporate business is lacking, the group business is lacking, and that really shows when you look at occupancy last week across the key global gateways. You can see, again, with the exception of a few across the Middle East and Asia Pacific, cities are struggling, and that is the case really across the globe because of the lack of course, corporate group and international visitation. If again we could move forward, and again, so we'll now look at the UK. We can advance the slide, please. One of the differences between this downturn and other downturns, and of course there have been many over the years, but one of the big differences has been the closures. And as you can see here, this is the percentage of rooms that closed. And look at that during the height of the pandemic. Almost 90% of all rooms across the UK closed, slightly more outside London than inside London. But then once we hit July 4th and hotels were allowed to reopen, you can see most hotels reopened more quickly outside of the capital. But even as we stand here today, still a full 10%, maybe slightly higher now as a result of the second lockdown, 10% of all rooms are closed. That's a significant number of rooms which are out of action. So what's that done to occupancy? Well, I'll take you through this. It's quite a bare slide, but it tells you a lot. So as we moved into the first lockdown, of course, occupancy fell off a cliff, just as you'd expect it to do. It then stabilized at around the 25% level before started to climb back up during those summer months, peaking for the August bank holiday, before then slowing back down. And you can again see the impact of the second lockdown at the beginning of this month, and performance in occupancy back down to where it was in the first lockdown. One thing to note, though, this is only for hotels that were open and reporting data. So if we actually take the basis as being all hotels, these occupancy numbers would be significantly lower into low single digits during certainly that first lockdown period. Moving to- Moving into average rates, we can see there that rates have suffered significantly. During that first lockdown, almost more than 40% decline year on year, back to a similar level, having really leveled out before that second lockdown at about the 25% below last year level. So rates are being impacted negatively as well. And if we look at the month of October and our key cities, with a couple of notable exceptions, you can see once again, it's the cities that are suffering more as we lack those key demand drivers for those markets. But compare that to the coast and the countryside markets, and it's very, very different. You can see for the month of October, the last full month we had, Norfolk and Suffolk regional, Devon and Cornwall regional, the Lake District, all north of 75% for the month. So the shoulder season extending, but again showing that people want to get out and they will stay at hotels if they're given the opportunity and they feel safe to do so. So coast and country holding up far better, and that's than the cities, and that's a trend we've seen across the globe. Looking at forward to business on the books, you can see if you look at that axis, the business on the books is low. It's subdued. There are a few weekend peaks as we move towards the Christmas period and, of course, New Year as well. But once we get into January as well, in many markets, business on the books is less than 5%. It's a really very much a challenging period, and we don't see that changing at present. And one of the reasons for that, sorry, if somebody could please advance the slide. One of the reasons for that is pickup. So we are simply not seeing hotels getting those new bookings. The pickup week on week, last week, as you can see, very short-term booking windows, and then it really fades out. And we're even starting to see some negative pickup where cancellations are outpacing new bookings. So not a pretty picture, it must be said. And if we could advance the slide, please. So, and again, so looking at the Midlands, so what I've done here is I've taken all of the submarkets that we track across the Midlands region and looked at occupancy from the beginning of the year. And you'll see an unsurprising pattern that we've already touched upon. But if you look at October, the markets doing best, Cheltenham, Gloucester, Stratford-upon-Avon, all driven by leisure business. Those markets that are doing worse, under 40% occupancy for the month, Birmingham, Derby, Nottingham, Coventry, obviously driven far more by corporate visitors. So a predictable pattern. And if we then look at the daily data for those markets as well, we can see here quite clearly that there was, of course, that peak for the August bank holiday. And then even as the region went into tier 3, we saw a bit of a peak for half term before really dropping quite drastically as the second national lockdown was announced. Looking at Birmingham, obviously the key city in the region, and we see differences even between the submarkets within that city. So the centre, as you'd expect, performing less well than the suburbs, with the notable exception of Solihull. But look at the airport, the NEC region. Obviously, airlift has been dramatically impacted by the pandemic, as has events group business. So no surprise to see very low occupancy levels for that submarket. And then looking at the daily data again for the Birmingham submarkets, we can see quite clearly, once again, the differences between them. And it's no surprise to see that Tamworth, Walsall at the top and the airport NEC at the bottom. If we can just advance the slide, please. And again, so looking at the business on the books for the city centre, as well as the airport NEC, and then Birmingham as a whole, again, very muted, some weekend spikes, and potentially existing business on the books moving into February, but ultimately, I think those are going to get cancelled at the NEC because those events, unfortunately, are no longer taking place. And then, as we can see, the last 8 weeks, the pickup for the next 14 days, very muted and declining week upon week upon week. So unfortunately for Birmingham, the picture does not look good. And again, that pickup on a daily basis, we can see there very short term, but the pickup week upon week, less than 2% in most cases. And again, some cancellations coming through at the NEC. But I don't want this to be all doom and gloom. Obviously, as mentioned in the intro, the Commonwealth Games are coming in 2022. We've got vaccines on the horizon. So there's no reason to believe that that positivity won't be enjoyed by the city when the games are on. And just compare that to the Gold Coast and to Glasgow, and you can see just how impactful the games were for those two cities. So certainly some positivity to come. And then just finally, if we can advance the slide, please. Looking at our forecasts, we can see, of course, big declines followed by recovery next year. But that recovery it is still significantly behind 2019 levels. As you can see, we expect London to be 50% behind, the regions 30% behind. And we do forecast Birmingham and the position for Birmingham very similar to those other regions. So very much in recovery. And then just to conclude, if we can again advance those slides, please. And just tab through the animation. So what we know at the moment, of course, the virus is still here. Controls are still in place. Business on the books is limited. We're looking for those vaccines to roll out before most demand drivers return. What we don't know, of course, is how quickly they will return and if there will be further lockdown restrictions. And of course, the economic damage. We don't have the full picture as of yet. So what we expect, recovery will stall without that mass vaccination. But we do believe that demand will recover. It's not irreparably damaged by any stretch of the imagination. People want to travel, they want to experience, but it's going to be a long road back, and we're not expecting 2019 levels until 2024. So some challenging years ahead, no doubt, but certainly some positivity on the horizon. So with that, I conclude my presentation. Thank you very much indeed for your attention. And we're going to move on now to the panel session.